We're further exploring the consumer paradigm. So when you're given as the interchangeable economic unit, the demand center, the derivative that you are. So we're going to explore the way how that goodwill has to be animated off the balance sheet of businesses to potentialize the relationality of people when they're orientated towards surpassing their redundancy or the principal product of commercial civilization, which is the consumer. All businesses, if they're trying to capitalize on the goodwill of you as their customer, they seek to grow their margins. But through growing their margins, the relationality that you share with a brand is want. All right, so they're just monetizing your want or what you're credited as a consumer. So in order for a civilizational enterprise which animates creativity to become a new way of doing things, you have to animate goodwill off the balance sheet of businesses. So that's what we're ultimately going to explore. And this will connect it to the ultimate goodwill associated with the use of a credit you are not the originator of. So you can look at it liminally along these lines, that obviously goodwill is an asset. It's simultaneously an asset and an intangible, but then obviously it's based upon it's accounted for. And so, but that claim or that asset that's on a balance sheet of individual businesses is subordinate to the principal goodwill associated with the originators of the credit that you use. So if we frame it along those lines, what we're doing is we're taking what is an intangible, so what is a balance sheet item, how it gets immanentized or animated to potentialize the relationality of what is a civilizational domain, and in turn potentializes the question of credit beyond parasitism or beyond the use of a credit you are not the originator of. And so therefore, through the orientation of a civilizational domain, a unified civilizational domain, you do justice to people. So because it doesn't become a question of value, it becomes one of justice, okay? So that's the way I've talked about the nature of value and justice, and the way how that if you acquit yourself of a transcendentalism, you cannot do justice to being born because you're twice born through the use of a credit you are not the originator of, through the way how that your parents endow the principal journey for life, which is a buyer's journey. So we can look at it from the aspect of goodwill. So if a business is solely focused on their value associated with the business, it's in reference to the brand, and so the way how that they obviously monetize in order to improve their margins. And so if you know anything about business, that if you've got marginal returns, well, how can you as a business improve your profitability, so increase your margins? All right, so that's kind of the way how you would differentiate yourself as an entity from what is a commoditized offering. All right, so that means to say that enables your margins to grow and your profitability to grow as a result of that if everything remains equal. But what does that mean there? Well, that means to say that you're just monetizing goodwill. So the more value associated with your brand, the more it enables you to leverage off it for the returns, for your profitability. So why is that an issue when you're looking at, why is that important when you're looking at the straddling of the divide, or the way how that you have to take a commercial paradigm and turn it into a creative paradigm? Well, if the spiritual, say, question of goodwill is discounted through it being monetized, obviously it has to be animated in order to potentialize. All right, so if we step back from that and look at it from that aspect, well, what happens when, so look at we'll give a scenario with the way how business is orientated towards the question of your loyalty now. And it's very easy to understand what's set in train, and the way how there's a slight difference to what we're exploring when obviously the principal product of the consumer is to be made redundant. That's the civilizational enterprise. That's what we're all engaged with, okay? But then we have to give context through the way how businesses risk, all right, region risk, to discount obviously the risk-free proposition of the consumer, because everybody is produced in the same manner. If I'm like, let's say I'm I own a cafe, and so what I've got a loyalty program. If we're every say 6 coffee, I get one free. So what you do is you got the stamps, and then obviously the seventh one you get free. Obviously, the whole point of the exercise is to ensure the person keeps on coming back. All right, because so to be loyal to that particular say cafe compared to another one, because they know that the person would know that at the end of the 6 coffees, they're going to get one for free. So that is just an example of, and there's loyalty programs, the way how they have points. Obviously, that means to say that it will go towards, a discount. And so therefore, the whole purpose is to generate lifetime value. So what you're doing is that you've set up, you've got the initial touch point, if you have a good experience with a business, and then it's the way how they make it stickier, ultimately. And so therefore, to maximize the return on the investment of acquiring you initially, we could say. All right, so there's varying different kind of loyalty programs, but we know that it works off that basis, okay? So why is that important when you're looking at a spiritual renewal? Well, if we equate goodwill with a accounting entry, then what we do is that our understanding of goodwill is impoverished ultimately, because the redemption, the arc of redemption, as I've covered off prior, is to monetize existence. And so therefore, what's that mean? Well, if you invest in the redundancy of the consumer, so you're a product, but you're obviously investing in the asset that you're given as, it's so people can toll you. All right, it's rentism. As I said, the nature is, it's very agricultural in that regards. And so that means to say that if you're loyal to a fault, well, it enables us to work with the way how that we take a spiritual understanding of goodwill and it to become impoverished through it becoming an accounting entry. And through it becoming an accounting entry, we don't understand the way how that we basically suck out the public life of a place when it becomes commercial. All right, it does, because what you happen is that people are orientated towards place as economic agents. So through their leisure, so therefore the way how they differentiate, the way how they spend their time. All right, but how do you spend your time when it's given as a totalizing claim of an economic good? Well, it's a pastime. It's past the potential of the change that you could effectuate if the way how that you will receive your time is the economic good, and there's no distinction between your labour and your leisure, because leisure given as leisure is still an economic good, because there's a totalising claim of the buyer's journey that is always transcendent to the distinction that we work off. So in the case of the goodwill associated with our when goodwill is equivocated with a accounting entry, what you do is that you eviscerate basically the public space. It's no longer cultural. So we have cultural activities, but the cultural activity is commercial. The whole paradigm is commercial. So what you don't have cultural lives, the cultural life of place when it's given as commercial is spiritually impoverishing, because you're just economic agents. You're orientated towards interest. Okay, and so therefore what you do is you region spirituality to a church or a fucking temple or whatever the case may be, all right? Because you don't realize that your primary religion that you practice is the acquittal of that transcendental truth claim that's made on time. So any of the way you sell yourself on your religiosity is just a value add to the buyer's journey that's been set for it. People have no understanding of the way how they get captivated with a renewal, let's say, of religion within the West. Let's say it's neo-paganism or Christianity, or even if you're Jewish or fucking Muslim, it doesn't Buddhist, it doesn't matter. Like, it literally doesn't matter. If you're orientated towards life as a compensatory exercise, your primary religion is a religion that you won't even acknowledge to yourself, which is quite bizarre. It's sensational. It's staggering in scope, basically. So here you have the scenario of a spiritual principle of goodwill is equivocated into a monetary entry, an accounting entry. And so as a result of that, you suck the life out of place, and it's just given as commercial. So in order for you to animate culture, so culture is associated with goodwill. Ultimately, it's the way how you share a bond that's not based upon the rivalrous dynamic that underwrites commercial paradigm. And so your economic agents or binding buyers' journeys together, what you're doing is that you're freeing yourselves to share place in a completely different way, not as economic agents. So the way how you have to do that is that business, because if they're always monetizing your goodwill, they have to animate it. And they have to animate goodwill off the balance sheet to potentialize the relationality, and so the way how things are given. Now, if it's not done, why would that be important from the aspect of loyalty? Well, I touched upon the nature of an individual business, if they're say animating goodwill. So the context was the way how that they would give of that free coffee. So let's say, for instance, that you have the scenario where you have a business that gives you something for free, all right, as it were. How would you react to that? What would be your frame of reference? Now, obviously, we're cynical because everybody's always trying to sell us shit. All right, so that's the frame of reference. So it's the way how things are given. So if the way how things are given, there's an indistinction, but there's a subtle difference between it, because it's not that the goodwill, you've got to think of the loyalty associated here. If that loyalty is not connected to the individual business, but the ecosystem, so the civilizational enterprise that individual business is one node of, all right, that changes. Because that means to say that you're not loyal to the business, you're loyal to what the business is involved in, which is a civilizational enterprise. What's that? Well, it's to create a way of life that is artful or creative. So it's through the redundancy of the consumer. So when you receive in that context, let's say you receive something for free, well, it's not for free. It's the emission of the credit you are not the originator of. So once again, that's the way how you can connect, the way how goodwill needs to be animated off the balance sheet to potentialize the question of credit that's got nothing to do with parasitism. All right, so you have to emit the use of credit as a means of exchange, so as value, and connected to your plight, your existential plight. The way that you have to do that is it has to come. Once again, we've got demand and supply. So you've got to think of the way that you're approaching the excluded middle. The excluded middle, so the difference, what we would otherwise associate with value, so the way how it predicates exchange, is subordinate to the value, is to what you absence when you're given as a consumer. Because once again, the primary trade is existential arbitrage, and you absence creativity, all right? So if a business is animating goodwill off the balance sheet through you receiving something that you didn't pay for, the emission of credit is telling. It's not telling you that you're receiving something free. It's a provocation, we could say, because ultimately it's dealing with the nature of credit, and the credit has got nothing to do with money. It's got to do with your demand, the demand center that you are otherwise given as. So if the business makes an exception to that, it's ultimately wanting to potentialize the relationality beyond the reduction, okay? And it can only do that if it's part of an ecosystem that is a civilizational enterprise. Otherwise, you would think it's just them trying to generate goodwill or loyalty to the individual business. But that individual business is in an ecosystem of other businesses doing the same thing. So if every single business is animating goodwill off the balance sheet, it's to potentialize you and the way how things are given. Because ultimately, if you have enough businesses that do different things, all right, so we're talking about the value or necessity, all the way how things are given. It becomes an ecosystem to, you potentialize the value adds of the ecosystem, and you're creating an economy. Now, if the economy is based upon a singular, basically unified orientation for life, it unifies itself, because what you're doing is that you're trying to do justice to you as a person. You're no longer seen as a demand center, but the transition, the process is literally through animating what would otherwise be monetized to potentialize you. And so in that way, it's ultimately potentializing you to question the nature of credit that's got nothing to do with means of exchange, because if you were only to look at it as a means of exchange, you're going to look at it the way how you rationalize, the price of your labor. And you're not going to realize that actually, if you don't understand the way how you produce yourself through your role, ultimately you're never going to look outside the paradigm of the totalizing claim of a fucking buyer's journey. So we could say it works in so many different ways, because you have an ecosystem. That ecosystem is built for people that know what is the civilizational enterprise, and also for people that don't know, because through that, what it does is it's a provocation for people maybe to think outside. Like, so that what they can do is they can look at it cynically and so then level it off, all right, and dismiss it. That's what they do. They rationalize it, or they discount it. They discount because they discount it why? Because that's just a business. They're doing it for whatever reason. But if there is something that business is engaged in that is beyond the goodwill associated with the individual business, so with a civilizational enterprise, then what you've got is you've got this umbrella that basically gives context to your goodwill. And the whole umbrella organization, so what I have created ultimately for this, its principal thing is not to monetize your goodwill, but is ultimately to make redundant the consumer form of life. That is that there's only one thing that we need to do. That if we do that, then what we bequeath is we transcend the totalizing claim of a buyer's journey, and we orientate our descendants to a way of life that is artful, that does justice to being born, because you're no longer twice born through the use of a credit you are not the originator of. And so ultimately the question of goodwill is questioning the nature of the credit. It's got nothing to do, like I said, with value, but it's existentially grounded. It's got to do with justice. How can you be indivisibly given towards life? And ultimately that's the difference. That's the way how you need to see this thing in order to see the significance of what will be otherwise be just leveled off cynically, because somebody's always trying to sell you shit, and maybe you even think I am.